Navy matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Liam Carballal, and on today's episode of History Repeats on HMTV, I am joined again by Richard Acritelli.
Good to see you, Liam.
Back again.
Thank you.
And we will continue to discuss America in the interwar years and our transition into war footing. One of the seminal moments of the 1930s, and it would have very large-scale repercussions for the war, are the military experiments of Billy Mitchell. Can you speak to him a little bit?
Well, Billy Mitchell was he was an Army officer, like all Army officers itself. At this stage in the game in the 1920s, he has experience doing World War I, but he's a flyer, and that's a new thing.
Yeah.
All right, so if you look at, like, what is it, the Space Force today?
Yeah.
It's new. So you have a new way of looking at things. It's a new military part of the armed forces. So what Mitchell was kind of advocating for was that the Army would lose its control of the Army Air Force.
Yeah.
And that the Air Force itself would have its own component of the armed forces.
So we get the Air Force from him.
He's really a pioneer with the Air Force. And he's going to be like the man, the officer that drives the future air officers like Hap Arnold, Spatz. And, you know, you look at these officers, Tibbets, who's going to end up dropping the atomic bomb, right, with the Enola Gay, Curtis LeMay, who said, if the war came to an end and if we lost, I would have been considered a war criminal because of his use of B-29 bombers in the Pacific. So,
If I'm not mistaken, he coined the phrase, bomb them back to the Stone Age.
yeah, and he meant it too. He had that cigar in the corner of his mouth. He was a very, very tough figure, very capable officer, but he believed in the use of brute strength in terms of air power.
Yeah.
Now, Mitchell is kind of removed from that because his views are going to be kind of created or manufactured from those later Army officers. So they're some of the select few officers in America that look at things very differently, and they're seen as complete outsiders.
Yeah.
So now Billy Mitchell makes these comments that could be almost be seen as insubordination in the military. You want to disagree in the military, you better do it behind closed doors. You have to say what you have to say, you do it behind closed doors. It's once you go public, that's a completely different situation. So now they try to get Billy Mitchell on insubordination, on being a radical Army officer, going against his own credo in terms of the military, something that he's supposed to follow through with. And Billy Mitchell puts his career basically on the line for his belief in air power.
Yes.
For this country, for the United States.
He one of his big experiments was using aircraft to sink ships, which, you know, you look today, the basis of American naval power is the aircraft carrier. Could you say that he is maybe the grandfather of American policy in that respect?
Yeah, sure. Because two things. In terms of those ships he destroyed were either older American ships or ships that were taken during World War I. And he showed that air power could destroy ships out in the Atlantic or the Pacific, and that air power is going to continue to evolve. Navy is going to evolve, but the airplane is going to evolve as well. And it's going to become rapidly important that our country understands the growth of this military power and its potential.
Yeah.
If not, we're going to fall behind. Now, at his court-martial, they ask him, you have these beliefs, and they're almost laughing at him.
What was he court-martialed for?
Insubordination.
Oh, all right.
And probably, if you look at it, there's probably other military terms that could be used, you know, different counts, different charges, but it's insubordination. So the fact he does it in the press, and now he has Americans supporting him, is going to add, fuel to the fire for him there. So now General Douglas MacArthur was actually on that committee in terms of determining whether or not he stays or he goes in terms of a court-martial. One thing about court-martials is very serious within the military. That's something that will stay with you. You're expected to get an honorable discharge. But a court-martial is something, it's just a black mark on you. So now he fights it. There's actually a great movie called The Court-Martial of Billy Mitchell with Rod Steiger and Gary Cooper.
I'll have to check it out.
And the lawyer, if you remember the movie Trading Places, the Dukes.
No kidding.
Right? The lawyer, I think his name is Bellamy.
Yeah.
Was it Ralph Bellamy, I think it was, right? He's the defense for Billy Mitchell. So it's this great film. And Gary Cooper, he had like a fever. I don't know if he had malaria. He had something, and he was being inflicted with it. And Rod Steiger looked like this little pit bull, short, stocky lawyer. They brought him in to get like a conviction out of him, right?
Yeah.
So now in the film, and there's some truth to it, I did research on Billy Mitchell and air power and stuff along those lines. So the film is pretty close to it. So they say to Billy Mitchell, well, who's going to attack us? The Japanese. First, they'll attack us at Pearl Harbor. And second, they'll attack our holdings, right? You look at our holdings, the Philippines, Guam, Samoa, Wake. Okay, just to name a few, right?
And he attacked our fleet with air power and sank our navy.
And this is your show, right? Would history repeat itself so many years down the road?
Yeah, right.
It's amazing to think about it. Yeah. And in the movie, they're laughing at him. So now he's got this fever. He doesn't look good, and they're laughing at him. And then they're saying, well, because you're making these pronouncements, we almost had to apologize to the Japanese government, and you're going to create hysteria. And what does Billy Mitchell say? I'd rather have people scared than dead. So when you look at Billy Mitchell, he gets court-martialed, and the biggest thing is insubordination. He's an Army officer. He's not supposed to say anything. But he says the technology is so powerful. It's so moving. I mean, just look at the basic things like we have. The two of us have on us right now, cell phones.
Yeah.
Think about what cell phones are going to look like next year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. It's just technology. And it's the same thing with the military. And then he brings up, well, sooner or later, there's going to be ships that are going to carry planes and so on. And even though the aircraft carriers are almost being started at this time, right? They're going to get stronger. And the know-how is going to get stronger. And the oceans are not going to be enough to protect the United States. And they scoff at him. So, and he ends up dying, I think it was 1935, 1936. He ends up dying. And they end up decorating him so many years later. But it's a terrible, you basically made this man look like a pariah. Yep. And then you realize that, wait a second,
right.
He was right. He was 100% right.
All right. As the 1930s were carrying on, we saw a slow march towards war. We saw first the German re-annexation of the Ruhr region, remilitarization of the Rhineland, annexation of Austria. As this is going on, is there a change in military policy and in domestic policy by the U.S. government?
We're here in America?
Yes.
No.
Not at all.
Not until you get to September 1st, 1939.
Really? Oh.
Roosevelt is concerned. You get guys like MacArthur, but now MacArthur's out of the country. He's in the Philippines running their military. There's not much movement. Once again, the Great Depression is going to dictate U.S. foreign policy. We're like that turtle. We're going to stay in our shell. So you have Army officers like Patton. Patton was one of the wealthiest Army officers. His wife, Beatrice Ayres, they owned a lot of the textile mills up in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And then Patton's own family had money.
Yeah.
Where the Pattons were funny because they were from California, They also lived in Virginia, and then Patton had a house with a big ranch or barn up in Massachusetts. So they were
mother was from Massachusetts.
Yeah, they were spread out, right? So whereas Patton was getting his furniture from France, Eisenhower was getting his furniture out of the local dump and refinishing it. So there was a big difference, right?
Yeah.
Why is guys like Eisenhower, Bradley, Marshall there? Because they're still getting paid.
Yep.
They're getting food. They're getting shelter. All right? So you look at these men, they're like towards the end of their career because they're around before World War I starts.
Yeah.
Okay? Heck, Patton ran in the 1912 Stockholm Olympics. He took 5th in the pentathlon. Okay, 2 shots went through the same hole. So there's no way that shot was totally off the board because Patton was too good of a rifle shot or a pistol shot for it. So you have men that are there for a long time. Eisenhower goes into the Army later. He works in a creamery in Abilene, Kansas. He comes from a large family. Guys like him and Bradley used the government, like Grant did before him, to get out of a small town, to get a government-sponsored education, especially West Point. It's a top engineering school in America. Even maybe up until that point there, they're going to get out of a small town, they're going to get a commission, they're going to get some training, they're going to get travel. One thing with Eisenhower, he wasn't in World War I. The war ended before he got sent over. He was at Fort Dix.
Yep.
He was training tank crews. But he went with Pershing over to Europe, was the War Monuments Board Commission, and they kind of retraced the steps of the American Army.
Yeah.
All right, so they still had that fire in them, all right, to apply their trade.
Yeah.
And their trade was leading soldiers, was fighting, was, carrying out government policy on the battlefield. So I think in the back of their mind, they saw all this was going on, and they knew that Hitler was a problem. They knew that Mussolini was a problem. They knew that the Japanese was a huge problem. But the problem for them is it wasn't within the policy of the War Department at this time here. So even as the Army grows a little bit towards the late 1930s, it's still nothing in comparison. So you look at Patton, what's Patton going to do? He's going to be out in Hawaii, and he's going to ride his polo ponies. He has a yacht. He has race cars.
I think he invents a new type of sword at one point.
He's got a sword that his wife Beatrice chases him around his quarters with. Patton is a controversial guy, but he was a little bit of a character too.
Yeah.
He made his own tanker uniform, and I think he called himself the Green Hornet. Okay, him and Walter J. Christie from New Jersey, they actually create a tank that the American government doesn't want to take because they don't want to pay for it, that it might have been later the T-34 tank in terms of the Soviet Union. So he's got this money and he's got this knowledge, but it stops. It hits a roadblock itself there. He is with Bradley in Hawaii, and they were 2 completely different individuals. Patton comes from money.
Yep.
He ends up failing at West Point, not because he was a poor student. He was dyslexic, and he fails in math. So he gets turned back. Omar Bradley looked like a Puritan or a Quaker, minister. And he says, I try out for the pistol team that Patton was doing at that time. I think he was a lieutenant colonel at that time. And he goes, for the sport of it, I did it. I hit my targets. Yep. And Patton says to me, you'll do. And then he walks away. So he had completely different guys, but they were looking for their ways of staying in the service. The times dictated, but they also want another chance of leading soldiers. They're older now. They're older in the game. They do have some experiences. They were very junior during World War I. So when you look at this here, they're just watching the army, the German military, go into the Rhineland. Meanwhile, Hitler tells his forces, the British or French move against us, going into the western part of Germany, towards the French border. All right, you got to turn around like a dog with your tail between your legs and come back because we're not strong enough. What's the response to the British and the French? Well, it's their territory. They should be able to go in there. They could have stopped them right there. Then Austria, the Anschluss. he goes in there, the Union, right? Yeah. They're throwing flowers like he's some conquering hero coming back into his native country of Austria, right? Then you have the Munich crisis. This is great. The Sudetenland, right? 3 million German-speaking people in the Sudetenland. So now there's a great book. It's called Munich.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get a book and there's a lot of good pages and you fold a page over because you want to go back to it. Mm-hmm. Well, I did that with probably about 300 pages, right? So I can't find the page. For the life of me, I can't find the page, right?
Yeah.
So now...
Know that feeling well too well.
When you look at Munich, Hitler was really pushing an envelope against a country that was going to defend themselves. Yeah. Remember, the Czechs made a lot of armaments. They had armies in the mountains there. It was going to be very costly for the Germans.
Hitler's best tanks in the early part of the war were not his own Panzer IIs or ones. They were Czech tanks.
Yeah, there was stuff that they ended up taking from other governments, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very early on. So the Germans are well ahead of other countries, but they're not there yet to wage war. Mm. His own general said, sooner or later, they're going to catch on, and we're not prepared for this. Mm. They caught Hitler having some sort of fit, and he threw himself on the ground, and there's a German term for it. And the life of me, I can't find that page in the book because I would have read it today.
PMS.
And, well, that's the thing. He would have these unbelievable fits. Mm. And then normal German officers saw it, and they said, this guy's going to get us all killed sooner or later. Yeah. And they were trained officers. So he goes in because he had the nerve to do it. Mm. How do you know he had the nerve to do it? Because the British and the French don't do anything. Okay? Chamberlain stabs the Czechs in the back. Yeah. They make the peace in terms of, with the Sudetenland, in terms of Hitler's just going to take over all of Czechoslovakia a year later, right, or even less than that. And you look at today, right, what's the concerns with Ukraine? That it's good that we're talking to the Russians. That's a very good thing. Mm. But you're leaving the Ukrainians out of the early process of the negotiations. Now they're starting to be, included, which is not a good sign. All right, and it gets very dangerous. It's good that we're looking to make peace, but this is in their country. Yep. When it's all said and done, they're going to lose some territory. They're going to lose the Crimea, right, the Black Sea, part of it. And you can't leave Zelensky out. You can't leave the people out. That's a bad, bad look. Okay? And what is American First doing? We told you, they're too strong. They're going to keep on rolling. We shouldn't stick our head out here. And you know who you have at that time, who was very young, traveling in Europe right around that time, was John F. Kennedy.
No kidding.
Yeah. Harvard, very well-to-do. He might have been in the Naval Reserves, or might have been a little before that. Mm. And Kennedy travels through, and his dad was a huge America First, anti, getting involved. He's going to be, obviously, he's probably a billionaire still at that time there.
Yep.
He is our ambassador, Irish-American Catholic, our ambassador in London, which is a huge position, right, at that time. And he's saying, stay out of it. Mm. But, you see with the war, and the war took on a lot of different groups of people, from the poorest of the poor to the wealthiest later on, where John F. Kennedy serves, and then his brother ends up getting killed. Joe Kennedy gets killed flying over France. Yeah.
In the mid-1930s, one of the prominent isolationists was actually the Secretary of War Woodring, but he was eventually replaced by George C. Marshall. Why did Roosevelt choose Marshall?
Well, Marshall is going to be the Army Chief of Staff. Yes. Stimson is going to come in, and what FDR is going to do is he's going to take two Republicans. Mm-hmm. He's going to take Frank Knox, who's going to run the Navy, and he's going to take Stimson. And he's going to take two prominent Republicans because he knows that we're headed in this direction. Yep. And he's going to need support from the other end of the aisle. Mm-hmm. And that's always a good thing, is to go across the other end of the aisle. We don't see that too often these days over the last 15, 20 years. But it's good to tap the other end. You might not agree with them. You might not agree with their views. But they're eventually going to help you. Yeah. And that's what ends up happening with Stimson and Knox, right? Yeah. the most important thing that FDR does is he promotes General George C. Marshall, and he leapfrogs him over other officers, and he's going to become the Army Chief of Staff. Remember one thing, Marshall's not a young man here, but he's not completely old either.
Yeah.
And war is a young man's game. September 1st, 1939, three things happen. The war starts, right?
Yeah.
Germany invades Poland. The Depression is supposed to come to an end, and General George C. Marshall is the Army Chief of Staff. So now you're going to go from isolationism to now armed neutrality. So now what is armed neutrality? Now we're going to look out for our interests. And if we have to stick our head out of that shell to do it, we're going to do it.
Yes.
And that means supporting the British. We're going to do that. And then, 2 years later, we're going to support the Soviets, right after Operation Barbarossa.
Yes.
So there's going to be a series of events that are going to kind of gradually push us into the war. 2 years, but that was the way we had to go.
Yeah.
Because it was extremely dangerous. The America First at this time was getting dangerous. Okay, we're out of the Depression. The country made it. It was a very dark time period. Now we're entering another dark time period against the Germans and the Japanese who want to roll, who want to advance. They're not happy with just going to one country. They expect to take over the areas of influence in their sphere of the world there.
Yep.
And it's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
September 1st, 1939, the United States was ranked 17th out of all the modern nations in the world, just behind Romania. Now, Romania is an interesting country because they're going to end up supporting the Germans, and they're going to send some forces into the Soviet Union and so on. But Romania is not a military power. So for us, it was a strong navy.
Yep.
It was starting to build up some air power, but the army itself, okay, it was very dangerous. September 1st, 1939, because we're starting to realize how far we are behind other countries.
Yeah. So by this point, neutrality and isolation is on the decline, and we start to see policies like cash and carry, Lend-Lease, and the Selective Service Act. Can you speak to those?
Yeah, well, cash carry, you have the means to transport, we're going to sell you the weapons.
Yes.
The British are going to have a strong navy. Just like World War I, they're going to start controlling some of the sea lanes back and forth to the United States. The Germans have a navy, but it doesn't match what the British have.
Yeah.
But now you get into U-boats, and like with technology, right, we spoke about with the aircraft with Mitchell.
Yes.
The German U-boats are going to be stronger. They're going to go out a lot longer, and they're going to pack more of a punch. They're operating right off the coast of Long Island, not too far from where we are here in Glen Cove, operating off the coast of the city and so on. So you almost have a graveyard of German shipping, okay, in terms of the U-boats. And then you have a graveyard of American shipping. So we're going to start gravitating in that direction.
Yep.
Lend-Lease, we can give billions of dollars. What's the very famous saying? Your neighbor's house is on fire. You drag a hose over and you give the hose to them until the fire is out.
Yeah.
So what's the hose that we're going to give to the British? Tanks, planes, trucks, food, clothing,
Tommy guns.
financial assistance, Tommy guns. We're going to give them, okay? Some of it's going to end up on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah. And all that's going to do is create a greater wedge between us and the Germans and now pivot towards the British, which we were probably going to end up in that direction anyway. Hitler was very conscious of World War I, and he understood that Americans are going to trade with the British.
Yeah.
So he tried to say to his Navy, don't provoke the United States into a war here. We don't need them getting involved this early on here, okay? I mean, he makes this 2 days after Pearl Harbor declaring war, and that's going to be like that nail in the coffin for him, but it's going to take 3 years, right, for the war to come to an end after that point. But he's trying to keep us at arm's length.
Yes.
So we're going to send all these resources, bases for destroyers. What do we give to the British? We give them destroyers, right? Yeah. What does a destroyer look for? U-boats out in the Atlantic Ocean. So when you're looking at this here, okay, and this is to finish up, the biggest thing was the selective service.
Yes.
1940, 1941, we had the first peacetime draft of American military. Okay, it's going to get expanded at this time. So we're not even involved yet, but we could see the handwriting on the wall.
Yep.
Marshall starts getting rid of the older officers. And they always said that he had like this little black book. When he was down in Fort Benning, he would write down names of promising Army officers that he came in contact with, that he would sometimes, or at some time in the future, promote if he ever got to that point.
Yeah.
Okay? Just like Pershing, he's going to utilize Army officers itself, younger ones. He's going to give them responsibilities. Those Army officers that could do their job without, okay, much guidance, okay, stick their neck out a little bit, he's going to utilize. Now you're starting to get Patton, who was a little bit older. He thought he was going to retire.
Yeah.
Eisenhower thought he was going to retire. Bradley. So now you have all these Army officers, Mark Clark, Lucian Trescott, okay, Harmon, Ward, all these generals, right?
Yeah.
Now they're going to start getting promoted from colonel to brigadier general to now a little bit later major general there. So now they're going to start making these jumps. What you're going to see is that there's going to be these military maneuvers in Louisiana, Carolina, okay, and Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And what does Marshall say? I'd rather there be mistakes made in Louisiana than in the battlefields that we're most likely going to go to in Europe and the Pacific. Mm. And then he kind of sees, and he didn't know Eisenhower, okay? He knew Eisenhower, he knew his name, but it was Mark Clark who kind of told, okay, Marshall about Eisenhower. Eisenhower is going to end up being one of the war planners, and he's going to shine during the military movements because those are going to be the operations that he ends up planning out. When you look at Patton goes out of his range in terms of the maneuvers.
Yep.
And they go, well, you broke the rules. And Patton goes, I know of no rules in mobilized warfare. And then here's like Sears, right? Big Sears, it's like Amazon today, right? Sears for a long time. So Patton had so much money, his mechanic said to him, the Army can't get these parts for the armor, but I could buy them from Sears. So Patton buys the parts, and he probably took the receipt and stuck it in his pocket and never said anything about it. Okay, so you have Bradley, he's going to say, we had to learn how to walk before we could run. And that's exactly what we had to do. And the selective service, even the American First at that time, was close to defeating that bill in Congress and keeping it going, which is the craziest thing because we were not prepared. And what you're looking at is like the strength of the military is really going to come out of the vision of Marshall. Now, I know we're kind of running over time a little bit, but I have one story to tell you in terms of Marshall. Marshall calls a general, and he wants him in Washington, D.C. And the general goes like this to him. He goes, well, my wife isn't home, and we're having furniture delivered to the house, and I'm not sure if I can leave because she's not here. Marshall almost drops the phone out of his hand, and he goes, and this is probably right at the start of the war for us after Pearl Harbor. He goes, man, we're at war, and tomorrow you'll be retired. And he hangs up the phone. So he wanted officers that would take chances. They weren't foolish, but they weren't asking them every 10 minutes what to do. And you know, there's another good story. General Walter Bedell Smith. He was kind of like Eisenhower's bastard, right? You understand what I'm saying? There's guys like that.
Yeah.
Eisenhower might not tell you it. Okay, but his chief of staff will. And his chief of staff will get nasty and curse, and the general expects you to do this here. He's not going to tell you in this way, but this is what he expects. So now Smith ends up looking at this light infantry vehicle, and he believes this is something that's good for us. So Marshall only wanted one page of written information because he was looking at so much. He had to be able to digest it and move on to something else. So Marshall has a meeting, and he ends up saying, and this is the officers that he wanted. So now he ends up saying, I'm in a meeting. Well, General, I think you should see this. So now he's got the producer, the manufacturer on the phone, and now he ends up going back in there. He goes, I'm in a meeting. I can't talk about this now. So now he disrupts George C. Marshall a third time. And Marshall goes, all right, what is it? He goes, I believe that we should have this developed, that we can utilize this here. And it was a Jeep.
Okay.
So he goes like, I want to order 50 of them. So Marshall shows him who's boss, and he orders like 32, some odd number, right? And that's what Marshall wanted. And FDR had the hindsight to listen to people who served with Pershing, to Pershing himself, to elevate Marshall during these dark times. Because Marshall almost quit a couple times because he was firing his friends that were getting older, that weren't being able to be in that position there any longer. So,
all right, Richard, that was very informative. Thank you.
yeah,
for
no
having me.
problem.